This is Brad Templeton with Robocars.com. I'm here with the top 10 and a half stories in Robocars for 2021. Now, at number 10 and a half is a non-Robocar story, which was the rise of the electric car. There's always been a connection between self-driving cars and electric vehicles, and 2021 was a big year for electric vehicles, both in terms of the large number of vehicles which exploded, and in the United States with the proposal, and not yet success, of passing a massive infrastructure bill that allocates billions and billions of dollars for the building up of electric vehicle infrastructure and incentivizing those cars. This will be good for Robocars. Robocars have tended to be electric, both because it's a good choice and because it's nice to have all that power available. And in the future, we'll see this infrastructure handy for all the self-driving electric vehicles that go on the road. At number 10, the story begins with Cruise. Cruise, a unit of General Motors, though also invested in by other companies, started to reveal a lot more about what they've been doing, and they've had a number of big news events. One of the biggest events happened recently when the CEO of General Motors, Mary Barra, fired Dan Ammann, who had been the CEO of Cruise. He had once been a contender, actually, for CEO of GM. Reports say that firing was due to a disagreement about the future of Cruise, in particular, whether Cruise would work strongly focused on its Robotaxi vision, or it should export its technology into other products in GM. Dan Ammann also wanted Cruise to go public, which would allow it to exploit the very high valuations that the markets are offering. Well, that battle came to a head, and he was tossed and has been replaced, at least temporarily, by Cruise founder Carl Vogt. This is sort of the battle that goes on in the Robocar world between making robotaxis, self-driving vehicles which provide ride service to people, similar to Uber, and making cars that people will sell to consumers, something, of course, that General Motors has done all of its existence and continues to do. Many people believe, I believe, that the robotaxi vision is the world-changing vision, and the car vision is nice and valuable, but not nearly the same. It seems as though GM has slipped away to what many other car OEMs are doing, not wanting to see their industry turned upside down at the speed of startups, which is what the robotaxi vision does. Instead, they want to focus on continuing to be GM. Now, they're still ahead of a lot of other companies which haven't done nearly as much as this, and there are a few other car OEMs that are also working very hard at building robotaxi divisions inside them in startups like Argo AI, which is closely tied with Ford. There's more to come about Cruise, by the way, later in the countdown. At number 9 is sensors, in particular the rise of all sorts of new LIDARs and radars and developments in these technologies. This year we saw a number of companies show off LIDARs of incredible new capabilities, much higher resolution, better range, the ability to detect the speed of every target they're getting data from, and lower cost and new ways of manufacturing. We saw some of this as well in radar, with what's called imaging radar that can actually get some resolution about what it sees and not just the very coarse resolution that you get from traditional radar. We saw many companies, Argo's radar in particular, showed off some incredible resolution, but so did Waymo and other companies. There's, of course, a battle mostly between Elon Musk of Tesla and the rest of the industry about what the role of LIDAR and radar will be in self-driving vehicles. Pretty much only Tesla and a few startups believe that LIDAR will not play a role, and the rest think it's going to be very important. But one of the things that makes it even more likely that it will be important is that it's getting so much better, and it's getting cheaper. At number 8, we have the pandemic. Now, the pandemic is the biggest story of both 2021 and 2020, of course, and it put a real damage on the micromobility and other smart mobility industries, making people stop riding Ubers, stop riding scooters, and be afraid even of getting in a self-driving car that has a driver in it, a safety driver, a human safety driver. However, at least in the middle of 2021, we saw a bounce back from that. And micromobility companies started coming back. More and more people were using these technologies. People are even inching their way back to transit. Now, of course, the end of the year saw the rise of Omicron. And Omicron is surging at incredible speed, even though it's not as deadly as original variations. And so for some time, we'll see a bit of backsliding in that department. Coming in at number 7 is Apple. I didn't actually write about this story. And by the way, you will see links in the comments to various stories. I write about most of these topics, as well as links to other underlying information that the stories are based on. So check that out when I put that story up in writing. But it's worth noting that Apple had started efforts quite some years ago to make a self-driving car, but there were little rumors and leaks that came out suggesting it wasn't going very well. The management of this division has changed several times. There's been defection. There's been very little that's come out. Now, Apple is always a very secretive company. They do a very good job of keeping what they do away from the public, and I personally live just a stone's throw from Apple's headquarters, and I often do want to throw a stone there, but I don't learn too many leaks of what's going on there, and that's true also for the Apple car. But the leaks that are coming out now are saying that they're at it again, and we're seeing their vehicles driving in Silicon Valley on a regular basis. Now, what's interesting there is that Apple will probably approach a self-driving car differently from the other startups that have done it, and of course is the world's most successful tech company and never to be ignored. Apple, of course, usually comes into a marketplace not first, but tries to do it best. It usually makes a premium product, not a low-cost product, but it often gathers incredible adherence. So we'll want to continue to watch for whatever Apple reveals. At number 6 is our first story about Waymo. We're going to actually talk about them twice. And Waymo is still the leading company in self-driving cars. They began the soonest. They've got some of the best experts. They've had the longest and probably the most money to work on it. So it's no surprising that they have the lead that they do. But a few things became real about Waymo, and some of them good and some of them bad. Their safety record continued to be good. They continued to rack up more miles. And as we talked about, they've also started deploying in more areas, so we will talk about that. However, they were a little embarrassed this year because Waymo has the guts to let random members of the public get into their cars and take rides in their operations area just in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. And one of those riders, who made lots of videos, captured the car doing some pretty embarrassing stuff because it got poor instructions from one of their remote assistance operators on what to do in a traffic cone situation. Now, many people thought it took Waymo down quite a few pegs. I would say that all the other teams are probably no better at this, but it did show they still have some things to iron out. It also led me to believe that the thing that's keeping Waymo from deploying in a more real way beyond areas like Chandler is no longer safety. They've already demonstrated a safety record that surpasses what human drivers get, average human drivers. And so I think they've reached a safety record at a level where it's time to deploy, at least in the simpler areas, not just Chandler, but areas like it. But they haven't done so. And pondering that, I begin to wonder if the real challenge is now not just that safety and proving that safety, but also in developing great road citizenship, being a good driver on the road, courteous to other drivers, not an impediment to traffic. And unfortunately, there's a dial you have to turn between being safe and being a good road citizen. It requires a little bit of aggression to be a good road citizen. And Waymo is still working on that dial, and so is everybody else. So while almost everybody has said that safety is the core problem, the top priority at their company, they always say that. In fact, they can't even really be allowed to say other than safety is their top priority, even though that's not true. But nonetheless, safety is not enough. Good road citizenship is necessary. Another big change for Waymo was the departure of its CEO of the last 5 years, John Krafchick. John had come from the automotive industry, and he had been brought in to bring a little bit of that expertise together with the technological know-how of Waymo. However, for reasons not really fully disclosed, it was the end of his term, and he left earlier this year. And now Waymo is run by two co-CEOs, who one technical, one business, who had risen up the ranks within Waymo. In fact, Dmitry Golgov is one of the members of the original Waymo team, the original Waymo technical team. At number 5, I want to talk about delivery robots. And I have a little bit of a bias to disclose here, since I'm involved with the leading company here, Starship, an Estonian delivery robot company. Starship announced this year that they had made 2 million paid deliveries to customers. Now, they're not alone. Alibaba also announced that they had done 1 million deliveries, 1 million packages. Their robots are much larger and carry many more packages. And several other companies announced milestones like DoorDash, Serve, Yandex, and Neuro in the delivery robot space. But Starship's delivery milestone at 2 million deliveries is remarkable because in the world of autonomous transportation, really nobody else is at the stage of having a commercial operation where paying customers are using it and relying on it. Waymo is selling rides in Chandler, Arizona, but frankly, it's a test bed. It's not a town where riding in Ubers was a very popular thing to begin with. What the delivery robot companies are doing, because it's an easier problem, is actually making real commercial services and starting to get, not yet there, but eventually to a point of a profitable service, which is where everyone wants to go. So keep watching the delivery robot companies because you can't kill a pizza. Your safety constraints are different. And it's allowed those companies to do more and get further. Obviously, in the case of Starship, operating on the sidewalks at low speeds is much easier than operating on the roads at higher speeds like Neuro has to do. At number 4, I'm going to put Tesla. Now, from a news standpoint, we probably talk about Tesla more than anyone else inside the industry, and no surprise, it casts a big shadow. A couple of big notes about Tesla. First of all, this year they decided to remove radars from their cars, which as a sensor many people believe is very important for self-driving. Tesla continues its philosophy of deprecating LIDAR by now deprecating radar, saying that they believe the only way to solve this problem is by solving computer vision, and that once you've done that, you're not going to need those other sensors. But they went further and don't deploy radar in their latest cars. Many believe that the reason for this is actually one of Tesla's clever adaptations of the chip shortage. Tesla has managed to get through the chip shortage much better than other companies because as a software company, they're much less dependent on the machinations of individual chip suppliers in putting together something to make their car work. Now, nonetheless, the big story in Tesla continues to be their FSD product, or full self-driving, a name that annoys everyone in the industry so much that Waymo actually issued a press release saying they're not going to say self-driving anymore because the name has been muddied by a certain unnamed company who everyone knows. I recently was able to drive with the Tesla FSD beta product that is out there, and I'm going to post a more complete review later, but I'm afraid my initial observations were pretty disappointing compared to the many videos we've seen on YouTube of FSD in operation. This is not yet ready at all. I very much doubt it will be ready anytime soon, absent a true breakthrough in AI and computer vision, and of course Tesla is betting on that complete breakthrough. Nonetheless, many people who haven't seen what real self-driving cars have to do and can do, in the case of the leaders, think that this is still an impressive product, and I'm afraid it just isn't. One of Tesla's decisions has been to make a car that doesn't use maps. And one of the reasons they don't want to use maps is that it's somewhat expensive to map the entire United States or an entire country, the entire world, and to keep it up to date. It's not prohibitively expensive, but it is a cost. And if you want to be a car company selling self-driving cars, you can't sell a car that only works in a few cities. You can't say, let's make the Chevy Los Angeles, which is only good in Los Angeles. That's just not something that can happen in the ordinary car sales world. It's fine for Robotaxi. You can make a successful Robotaxi that only drives the downtowns of a few major cities, and you have a real product without needing that sales volume, and you can do that pretty easily with maps. But there's a temptation to not use maps if you want to make something that will be sold anywhere. However, Tesla does use maps, but they don't use complete maps. By maps, I mean, of course, detailed, high-resolution maps that show you all the details that you need to know, rather than navigation maps, which just have the geometry of the road and its lanes, which Tesla, of course, has and has had for some time. But Tesla adds extra detail in certain places where it needs it, but there are still plenty of places they haven't added that detail. So I'm afraid I still have to rank Tesla fairly low down in terms of self-driving efforts, but of course they're still number one in electric cars, and they just released incredible sales numbers for 2022, beating all the other companies and perhaps not justifying their immense valuation, but at least painting a picture of why it might be worthwhile. At number 3, the story is San Francisco. Well, San Francisco gets a lot of the attention in the technology world, of course. The Silicon Valley is the world's capital of technology, along with San Francisco. And many of the self-driving car teams are there or have offices there to do their development. San Francisco has got a bit of a checkered history, though. It was one of the few and first cities to ban the Segway when it came out. It banned delivery robots very soon after they started coming out. So it's got a little bit of a Luddite attitude there. Even so, everybody wants to operate there. And Cruise, in particular, dedicated itself to operating in San Francisco, headquartering itself in San Francisco, and making sure that its cars could work there. And this year, Cruise, as part of their opening, began actual operations in San Francisco with no safety driver in the car. These aren't open to the public yet. They are working for GM employees and in only certain regions of San Francisco, but they're at least reached that milestone. Now, that caught them some negative attention after they released a video of the first rides with Cruise founder Kyle Vogt. They got the attention of some of the San Francisco's officials who noticed in the video that the car never pulled off to the side of the road in order to pick up or drop off people. It always just stopped in the middle of the lane. Now they are doing their tests and operations on quiet streets late at night. This is not a major burden there. It's the kind of thing you see Ubers and taxis doing quite a lot of the time, but it's not technically allowed. In fact, in the video that we saw, we see the car dropping off Kyle in the middle of the lane when there's a nice spot, the spot he's actually going to, which is completely empty just 100 feet ahead. It's pretty clear that they have not yet dealt with the problem of drop-off and pickup, and that's a very important problem for a taxi service. It makes perfect sense that you solve one problem at a time, and you start by getting the car driving safely on the roads, and you work on getting the pickup stuff done better later on. But San Francisco said, we're not having any of that, and they want Cruise to stop if they can't handle that problem. We'll see what happens there. But nonetheless, a good milestone for Cruise, putting them a little further on the road. However, as I mentioned earlier, the firing of their CEO may mean that there's a slightly different focus there at Cruise, not the focus that I would pick, or apparently that Dan and Mom would have picked. Now, the other story in San Francisco is the arrival there of Waymo. Waymo, for the last couple of years, has been operating a self-driving taxi service with no safety driver aboard in the suburbs of Phoenix, Chandler, Arizona. And it's been doing it with good success and good safety record. They announced this year that they're deploying more heavily in San Francisco. They have a big depot there, and they're actually running out, giving rides to, well, sort of members of the public. You have to be on a special approved list, just as they began when they started in Chandler, Arizona. And also, they're not driving the downtown. They're driving most of the city, but they're leaving out the most congested part of the downtown and doing all the rest of the city. This is going to be an interesting head-to-head battle. For a long time, Cruise said, sure, Waymo started before us, and sure, they have great technology, but they're working on the easy problem. We at Cruise are working on the hard problem of driving in a real city, and that's going to be worthwhile. It's going to make us win the game. Now they're both head-to-head in the same city, and we'll get to see a real battle go on. At number 2, I want to talk about trucking. Now, trucking's another one of those problems which, well, it's easier in many ways than making a robotaxi service because trucks pretty much only have to be solved for highways and the short distances to shipping depots from the highways. And highways are a really great and regular driving environment. There's nobody in the oncoming lane. It's all divided. There's strict rules. There's no pedestrians, no bicycles. Much simpler, but, of course, much faster. If you make a mistake, especially with a giant semi-trailer, you're going to talk about it, some real serious consequences. So it's easier and harder, but nonetheless, technologically, it can happen sooner. And so several companies have been putting out trucking products and showing them off, demonstrating them, running them with no safety driver in the truck. Companies like Aurora, companies like Too Simple, companies like Plus, companies like Kodiak, and Waymo itself, which has half of its venture also on trucking. And all of these companies did various demonstrations today of where they're going and are getting ready to move actual cargo. Now, the one reason not to do trucking is that success in trucking largely means a bit more safety because, of course, there are a lot of bad truck accidents, and if you can prevent them, that's great. But mostly it's about making trucking more efficient, saving money for shippers, getting goods to people sooner. All great things, but not the world-changing thing that Robotaxi service is for changing our cities and how we live. But because it's easier, it's a thing that people can do sooner. And we've seen the companies doing this, some of them going public, like Aurora and like Too Simple, and getting immense valuations from the market. So we're going to continue to see lots of excitement in trucking. And that finally brings us to number one, which is China. Well, China's dominating most of the world's stories today, and it's not too surprising that a lot of good things are going on there. Now, not just China, but we saw a lot of live robotaxi deployments in China this year. In particular, 3 companies are operating robotaxis in different parts of China with either no safety driver on board or a much more limited safety driver operation, either remotely watching or not in the driver's seat, which, by the way, Yandex has also done in Russia. But in particular, we had AutoX operating in a suburb of Shenzhen and expanding out into other areas of Shenzhen. Shenzhen is the hardware Silicon Valley capital of China, and AutoX has been running their vehicles there. Now, because of the virus, I haven't been able to go to China for a few years, so I can't say I'm on the ground there and able to observe everything the way I can in places like Silicon Valley. So I mostly have to rely on the reports that we get from the companies themselves. As we know, news in China is a different thing than it is in the rest of the world. But nonetheless, the demo videos from companies like AutoX have shown them driving pretty well in environments that are more complex than Chandler, Arizona, and maybe even some of them are more complex than San Francisco. And so that's pretty impressive. Now, are they, cherry picking what they show us? That's a little harder to say. We haven't seen as many videos from random occupants that go in the way that Waymo allows. But nonetheless, this is a force to be reckoned with. We've also seen Baidu's Apollo unit operating vehicles in Beijing, in a site that will be shortly the site of the Winter Olympics if they go on, and we should see some Baidu vehicles moving around people in those Olympics and other places in China. And we've seen WeRide operate in Guangzhou and a number of other cities in China with their services. So while Waymo was the only party doing it for a long time, there's been an explosion in China. And to be fair, as I mentioned, there have been companies like Yandex operating with someone only in the passenger seat. We've seen Mobileye also show off their robotaxi service that they promised to deploy in Tel Aviv in this year, 2022, and also to deploy in Munich and a number of the cities around the world. Several other people are getting ready. Another side story about China is Waymo's announcement just a week ago that they will be using a vehicle built by a unit of Geely, a Chinese automaker, for their robotaxi base, their next one. They started with Chrysler Pacifica minivans and then Jaguar I-Pace electric sedans, and now they're going to use a custom-designed vehicle meant to be a robotaxi from a Chinese manufacturer. Now, Geely owns Volvo and Polestar, so it's actually one of the Chinese manufacturers that's had the most inroads into the Western market, and particularly with the Polestar, which is made in China. The Volvos in the West are still made in the West. But the truth is that China, which is the world's largest car manufacturing country by a large margin today, and the world's largest car consuming country, and certainly the leader in electric cars in numbers, has had not much in the way of inroads in the West. And that's in part because Chinese brands have no reputation, there are taxes, there are safety standards and so on to be dealt with. It's very interesting to see a robo-taxi based on a Chinese platform because you don't care about the brand of your taxi. People care a lot about the brand of the car they buy. They buy the best brands they can get that will be the most reliable, and they pay a lot of money for it. They're not ready to buy Chinese brands in most of the West. They're starting to. But if you don't even see the brand, that's a nightmare for the big Western OEMs for whom the nameplate, the brand, is their most important asset. They're starting to run out of assets on which they can outcompete the Chinese, and that's going to mean interesting things for the future of the automotive industry. So that's it. Our top 10.5 stories of Robocars for 2021. There'll be a whole new set of stories, of course, in 2022. You can continue to read my columns on Forbes.com and on my blog at ideas.forbrad.com and robocars.com for new updates on everything that's going on in the world of self-driving. See you soon.